almost the whole Indian population that can make it goes to the gathering of nations and they give thanks for many different things. Corn ends up being a very common topic with all the tribes because it is an important part of most of the people's sustenance. As I mentioned, for the Narragansetts, we were never heavily dependent on corn because the forests here were like a big, I'll say, super stop and shop. We had so many different mammals, so much wild vegetation, and we had so many different things pertaining to the ocean that we had available to us. So we were never really farmers. We didn't get into agricultural as much as some of the other tribes did. You have tribes out west now who, they raise cattle, they raise horses, they have big farms. We never really had to do that because of the fact New England and everything is just here for us. As I said, from the shellfish, the fish, deep water sea fishing, to the deer, we had a very good diet here. As a result, you can see that I'm an archaeologist for the tribe. I'm actually the Chief Deputy Historic Preservation Officer for the Narragansett Indian Tribe. Although there are women on the East Coast who are older than myself, they actually hadn't been doing the job as long as we have because we were federally recognized before them. And all these different varieties of corn have been saved for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The white corn, if you talk to a Hopi, they want blue corn. They don't even want anything of it as a blue. So all the different tribes have their preferences. And they do grow differently in different places. The different names, we actually had different names for the corn in its different stages. And according to Roger Williams in Kings of the Language, Indian women planted, tended, harvested, dried, and heaped all of the corn. The name in our language, Pishkwawich, is unparched corn, whereas Nokik is when it's already made into the meal. And so here, in our dialect, it wouldn't actually have been called maize. It's called wasam. Once the corn is broken, and a lot of tribes that when it's already broke up, that's when they call it maize. Once it's broke up into small pieces, and that's what's called wasam. Wasam. And that all depends on the dialect that the person came from. So a Shawmut Indian like myself, who's from Warwick, Rhode Island, where many of the royalists lived and roamed the coves, may actually have a little bit of a different dialect than Indians here in Charleston, who would have been predominantly Narragansett Niantics. I'm grateful to be here where my ancestors once were, and I'm grateful that you have preserved the way that they would have ground at the time of contact, as opposed to pre-contact, the grist mill, and that we have been able to salvage that part of our history. That's a very important part of our history of two cultures actually coming together. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they always insisted as well on a native grinder because of the stone. And it all was about the stone. The stone, I guess, is what's going to determine whether you get good grinding or bad grinding. And because they were such good stonemasons in their own natural right of knowing stone tools and whatnot, many of the grist mills I've heard have native people as their master stonemen. But as I said, when we look at the archaeological remains, we've only found the corn pollen preserved in two places, and that happened to be Cranston and Point Judith. The oral tradition and the oral story was that the crow brought us the corn being in his ear and from the Southwest. And so when you do a DNA, now with Bus's DNA, you do a DNA comparison to say a Narragansett, a Wampanoag, and say a Montauk, I actually have all of the blood of those tribes from 8 sachems. There are 2 set of colonists that came here, one Christian, one Jewish. So the 2 interacted with the Pilgrims very differently, with the Indians very differently. The way they adapted the culture of the native people was very different. So my understanding of that recipe, hold on. My understanding of that recipe is the Portuguese Jews that came to Newport introduced the lima beans into that recipe because they were not going to flavor it with pork. So the lima bean has a stronger taste and would at least have some flavor.
One of the things that fascinates me most about Johnny Cakes is their dexterity. And I wanted to know if you could speak a little about what the Johnny Cakes mean for the Narragansett tribe and what are some of the ways that they're used.
For us in Narragansett, the winters, the hard winters, you get through the harsh winters, not being able to maybe get out. The men were already out hunting, the women are home with the children, they're waiting for the men to come back with deer or any other small mammals they could get in the really roughest parts of the winter. And so as a result, Johnny Cake meal became a staple that could last. The original variation of the word, no cake, sounded too much to them like no cake. So they didn't like that word much. They didn't want to hear no cake? No, no cake. Have it. No cake? Oh, geez, no cake? So because of the problem with the translation of the word, they started calling it a journey cake. Because you could travel 3, 4, 5 days with it and it won't spoil. As long as you don't use the European recipe, which is they add a little milk to scald it, to thin it out, to brown it. If you don't use butter or milk, if you make it completely dairy-free, it lasts longer. So, you had different variations of that. So the Jewish people who ate parve and did not add dairy with their meats would last longer, could last 10 days if you did not add dairy to it. When the Christian sector who came from feudalism and were used to using dairy products, when they added the dairy to it, it lasted a lot less longer. So that's where, people started realizing, well, if you don't add the dairy, it can last a very long time. So that was its original name, journey cake, because it could journey for 10 days. And not too many foods can last that long without making you sick. And so native people, especially in the winter, you would make a mold. You boil the Johnny Cake meal, you put it in a gourd, you let it cool in the gourd, and you dump it over, and then you can slice it. Pour gravy over it, whatever. That's the traditional way that we would have made it. When the slaves came into play, and they cooked in the house on cast iron black pans, then they decided, well, throw a little of that in the pan. And it was the African influence that actually brought it to the black frying pan, because they weren't allowed to eat much on the farm. Corn meal or something, they could literally, if you found a piece laying on the ground, as you see, you can pound it yourself, boil it up, that's a little bit of something to eat. So as a result, if the frying pan's hot, and you've already cooked the meal, you might want to just throw a little on that grill, heat it up a little, brown it up. It's probably cold by the time they got it, the remains of it. So that's where the difference came in. And then within the slave trade, they brought molasses. And so they mixed the molasses in with it and made it into pudding. But many of those recipes are at the time of contact. Post-contact, the diet was much different. They didn't fry it. They used it as a mold in a gourd and just cut it into pieces. And, then they would use some type of, it depends. You could put sweet over it, you could put meat over it. It's a variety of things. Berries. Some people would mix it in with, different types of berries and put it in the gourd and dump it over and then slice it. So there's many, many different ways that we ate it as opposed to what we traditionally know now. I said our creation story says that the crow brought us sustenance, a kernel of corn and a kernel of bean in his ear to keep us fed. And so as a result, we bury in fetal position facing the southwest. And so that gives you an idea, maybe it came from the southwest. Of course, DNA was new. We could only surmise this by the way we buried our burial records. Now DNA tells us we did actually. We're more closely related to, say, the Pima and the Anastasi than we are the Wampanoag, which people wouldn't have guessed that. But we are. When Verrazano came here, he described the Narragansetts, and he says, wow, these are very friendly people, they're nice, they're kind. And then he goes on to tell you about the next few tribes he meets, and then when he gets here to Narragansett, he goes, now, wow, he goes, these are the biggest, strongest people I've ever seen of all mankind. He literally says some of them look like giants, which when we find some of our human remains, the forearm from here to here is like this. So many of our women, can you come over here to me again? Many of our women are very tall. I happen to be the runt of my mother's litter, but my sisters are all probably taller than her. And most of all, my cousins are taller than her. So we're very big people. We're very healthy. We had very healthy teeth for, we didn't have dentists or toothbrushes back then, so the Europeans marveled at, my God, these people have very good teeth care. They're big, they're strong, and they give birth and their babies live, which was very rare for the colonists. Their birth mortality rate was low, high. And ours, the women would give birth and go right back to the cornfields that day. And they're going, how are they so healthy? But it was the, I'll say the royalty of the Narragansetts who ate well, had such a huge bounty of food. But needless to say, I think that the diet here was such a good diet for the Narragansett people. They were strong, they were healthy, the abundance of what we had here. And you can see that in the difference of the colonists as well. When you see what the Narragansetts shared with their farming neighbors, as opposed to what the Wampanoags were able to share with their farming neighbors, you see a big difference. I'm going to share with you a few words so that you can familiarize yourself with some of the traditional words that you already know. Here's one, askuta squash. Squash. That comes from our language. Would you like a kiss?
Nooks.